China's hard times are set to continue. Three terrible phenomena are sweeping the country. Recently, inflation data in China for September was released, with the prices of fresh vegetables, pork, and fresh fruits rising by 22.9%, 16.2%, and 6.7%, respectively. Among them, the price of vegetables rose by 22.9% in 1 month. Some vegetables saw a larger short-term increase. For example, the month-on-month increase in green peppers and tomatoes in September was as high as 45.6% and 35.2%, respectively. Leading most foods, the price increase is too fast. People all over the country are shouting, "I really can't afford it." And this price surge is partly due to natural disasters. This year, heavy rainfall and high temperatures in many places have not only restricted the growth of vegetables, but also aggravated the difficulties of harvesting and transportation, causing the prices at the place of production to rise steadily. As for the future market, some researchers said that in October, when the temperature in most parts of the country was higher than the same period in previous years, production conditions were good, and with the weather gradually cooling, the transportation, storage losses, and transportation costs of vegetables decreased. If there is no disastrous weather, vegetable prices will gradually fall back and enter the seasonal downward range. Of course, in addition to natural factors, the impact of human factors cannot be ignored behind the soaring vegetable prices. China's agricultural industry chain is complex, the management level is not high, and the storage and processing technology of agricultural products lags behind, which also causes a large amount of vegetables to be lost during transportation, further raising vegetable prices. In the face of such a situation, to ensure the stability of vegetable prices in the future and reduce seasonal fluctuations, the most important thing is to improve the connection between production and sales, strengthen the construction of agricultural production infrastructure, improve the level of agricultural science and technology, and improve the market regulation mechanism. Otherwise, under the fluctuation of supply and demand, you won't be able to afford tomatoes and spinach this time, and next time, you may not be able to eat onions. Rising unemployment rate. Many companies are laying off employees and cutting salaries, and it is becoming more and more difficult to find a job. Some people can't find a job they like for several months. Even graduates from prestigious universities such as 985 and 211 also face employment pressure. The number of fresh graduates this year exceeds 10 million, and the demand for corporate recruitment has decreased, but the number of people looking for jobs is increasing. The National Bureau of Statistics previously released the unemployment rate data for August. Data shows that the unemployment rate of urban laborers aged 16 to 24, excluding students in school, reached 18.8%. Up 1.7% from the previous month. In September, the National Bureau of Statistics released the latest urban unemployment rate data, showing that the National Urban Survey unemployment rate reached 5.1%. Experts pointed out that the rise in unemployment is not only a manifestation of weak economic recovery, but also reflects changes in industry structure and a mismatch between supply and demand of human resources. The demand for recruitment in many high-skilled positions has increased, while low-skilled and labor-intensive positions have continued to shrink. This structural unemployment phenomenon is difficult to effectively solve in the short term and must be improved through joint efforts of all parties. Recently, the 2023 Individual Tax Clearance Data Report has been released. The proportion of people who do not need to pay personal income tax in the country exceeds 70%. In 2023, 67 million people will benefit from the Special Additional Deduction Policy, and taxpayers with an annual income of less than 100,000 yuan basically do not need to pay personal income tax. Combined with the data of each sub-item in the report, the more realistic data structure of Chinese income levels can be summarized. 745 million people earn less than 10,000 yuan a month. About 20 million people earn more than 100,000 yuan a year. About 12 million people earn more than 150,000 yuan a year. 7.3 million people earn between 150,000 and 1 million yuan a year. Only 700,000 people earn more than 1 million yuan a year. That is to say, if you earn 150,000 yuan a year, you are already considered a rich person. Many companies can no longer pay wages. Some netizens said that their company has not been able to pay wages on time for almost 3 months, and people in the office are panicking, worrying that the company will suddenly go bankrupt one day. Little do they know that the delay in paying wages is not because the boss deliberately refuses to pay, but because there is really no money in the account. Sometimes the company needs to raise money from various sources just to pay wages. According to The Economist, the vacancy rate of Green Creation Plaza, a 5-star park in Hangzhou Future Science and Technology City, has reached 1/3, which is basically the same as last year and has not improved. EFC, European and American Financial City, is an office building with a relatively low vacancy rate in the Future Science and Technology City. Last year, the vacancy rate was around 20%, but this year it has clearly exceeded 20%. Not only has the vacancy rate increased, but rents are also falling. This is a nationwide phenomenon, including first-tier cities such as Beijing, Shanghai, and Shenzhen. No city's office buildings have remained strong. From Grade A office buildings to ordinary office buildings, there was some structural decline in previous years, and now they are all facing this problem. The main reason is that there are fewer companies now, and companies need fewer people. Some companies have laid off employees, and the workload that was originally completed by 3 people is now being done by 2 or even 1 person. How do ordinary people survive the economic downturn? First of all, work hard to make money. This is what you need most, or even the only thing to do during an economic depression. Don't always talk about grand narratives. What you need to do is to work hard to earn every penny and make sure you and your family don't fall into poverty. Secondly, at work, try not to be willful and don't quit without a plan. Whether it's 996 or 896, in this environment, no one has it easy, including your boss, who is very likely living a more miserable and stressful life than you. A job is not only the guarantee of your basic living security, but also the necessary painful reality that helps you maintain the desire and vitality of most of your cells. Don't start a business unless you have to. If you really want to try, explore those light asset businesses, preferably those that require almost no capital investment. In terms of family asset allocation, try to be conservative. Try not to buy a house, don't leverage, don't take loans, and don't easily upgrade your consumption. If you want to manage your finances, then trust in the destiny of mankind and invest in some technology index ETFs that can represent the direction of humanity's evolution, or allocate funds to long-term, low-volatility fixed income products. IMF lowers China's 2024 economic growth forecast. Stimulus measures are unlikely to be effective. According to Financial News, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, estimates that the U.S. economic growth rate this year and next year will be 2.8% and 2.2%, which is higher than the previous forecast, mainly due to stronger consumption. In China, due to the weakness of the real estate industry and low consumer confidence, the IMF lowered China's 2024 economic growth forecast and bluntly stated that the Chinese Communist Party authorities' economic stimulus measures are still not enough to substantially boost economic growth. IMF chief economist Pierre-Olivier Gourinchas. For China, as I mentioned at the beginning, we have slightly revised down its economic growth in 2024 to 4.8%, compared to our July forecast. This revision is mainly due to the weakness in the second quarter of this year, which reflects the continued decline in household and business confidence, as well as the ongoing problems in China's real estate sector, which is, of course, the top priority for the Chinese authorities to address right now. In our assessment, the measures announced by the People's Bank of China at the end of last month are generally moving in the right direction, but are not enough to substantially boost economic growth, which is why our forecast remains at around 4.8% in 2024 and remains unchanged at 4.5% next year.
According to recent data from the Chinese Communist Party's National Bureau of Statistics, have the Chinese people really become rich? Is it true? Yes, some have indeed become rich. But unfortunately, only a small number of people have accumulated wealth. Although the Chinese Communist Party has never dared to disclose data on the gap between the rich and the poor, clues can be found in reports from financial companies, banks, and consulting firms. In 2023, CICC released data showing that China's total wealth is 790 trillion yuan, with total private property amounting to 430 trillion yuan. Of this, 290 trillion yuan belongs to 4.6 million wealthy people, 110 trillion yuan to 99 million middle-class people, and the remaining 30 trillion yuan to 300 million ordinary people. What does this mean? It shows that the 4.6 million wealthy individuals have an average asset of 63 million yuan per person. The 99 million middle-class people hold an average of 1.11 million yuan per person, while the remaining 1.3 billion ordinary people only have an average of 23,000 yuan, about $3,200 per person. It's no exaggeration to call them the proletariat. Essentially, the wealthiest 0.33% of the population owns 67% of the country's wealth, while 92.77% of the population owns only 7%, which is a mere fraction of the rich's holdings. There must be 2,739 poor people, each with an average income of less than 30,000 yuan, to equal one rich person with an average income of 60 million yuan. In addition, China Merchants Bank also provided data for reference. 0.07% of the wealthy hold a total of 3.74 trillion yuan in deposits, accounting for 31% of total bank deposits. Another 2.18% of the population, considered the second-tier wealthy, hold around 6 trillion yuan in deposits, representing 50.3% of the total. Meanwhile, 97.75% of the poor hold just 2.22 trillion yuan in deposits, which is only 18.7% of the total, with an average personal account holding of only 12,500 yuan. These figures reflect the statement made by former Premier Li Keqiang, who noted that 600 million people in the country have a monthly income of less than 2,000 yuan, a number that may even be optimistic. The latest data released by the CCP reveals another secret. Over 70% of people do not need to pay personal income tax. If an individual's annual income is less than 100,000 yuan, they are essentially exempt from paying income tax. In other words, most people have little to no money. This data does not include the super invisible rich who do not declare their wealth, but it does show that the top 1% of earners pay 50% of taxes, while the top 10% pay over 90%. From this, we can conclude that China's wealth gap is far beyond people's imagination, with a very small number of people holding vast wealth. The wealth gap in China has exceeded that of the United States. These figures are astounding, but more frightening is that China's wealth gap has been widening over the years. In 2023, sunflower clients accounted for only 2.4% of China Merchants Bank's customer base, but held 81.2% of the total assets. In 2007, sunflower clients held just 55.1% of assets. Minsheng Bank follows a similar pattern. Based on these calculations, 20 million Chinese elites hold 118.1 trillion yuan in deposits, while the other 1.4 billion people collectively hold only 29.5 trillion yuan, along with 81.6 trillion yuan in loans. This shows that most Chinese people are struggling. Another worrying issue is that after the current round of economic rescue efforts, the wealth gap will likely widen further. Retail investors have pumped around 3 trillion yuan into the stock market, but listed companies are cashing out, and institutions are profiting and moving funds elsewhere. Once the rescue is complete, most retail investors could be wiped out. Xinhua Daily Telegraph published an article on February 24, 2023, titled "Rich and Poor Divide Tears Apart American Society," criticizing the United States for having the richest 1% of households owning over 20% of the country's total wealth, and this proportion continues to rise significantly. However, the article fails to mention that as of the first quarter of 2021, the top 10% of Americans held 69.8% of total net assets. The proportion of American adults living in middle-income households fell from 61% in 1971 to 51% in 2019. China claims to have more than 200 million middle-class citizens. The poverty rate in the United States reached 11.4% in 2020, with 37 million people still living below the poverty line. But if the World Bank's standard of $5.5 per day per person is applied, China has 600 million people living in poverty. This is consistent with what Premier Li Keqiang stated during the National People's Congress in May 2020, when he said there are 600 million people with low to middle incomes, with an average monthly income of around 1,000 yuan, about 140 USD. In 2005, according to the World Bank's standards, there were 150 million people living in extreme poverty in mainland China. After years of significant change under the Chinese Communist Party, the gap between rich and poor has only widened.